Move on now to the verbs. They are divided into two categories, main verbs and auxiliary verbs. Auxiliary verbs are divided itself into two categories. Main or primary auxiliary verbs, which are all auxiliaries that we know, do, have, be, things like that, and modal auxiliary verbs, which are all modal that we know, must, should, have to, ought to, and things like that. Main verbs are divided into three categories: coopulative, compound, and lexical verbs. Coopulative verbs can never be passivized and requires a subject complement. Consider the example underneath. Mary is crazy. Is a copulative verb because it can be passivized and requires a subject complement, which is crazy, that completes the meaning of the subject Mary. Compound verbs. Just their name points out that there is a sort of combination. In fact, yes, there is the main verb and the particle. It is an adverb. If it is an adverb, then the whole verb is called phrasal verb. If it is a preposition, then the whole verb is called a prepositional verb. A phrasal verb can be separated by the proper pronoun of the object. So she looks up, the word becomes she looks it up. Another thing that they can never be separated by an adverb. So you can't say she looks quickly up the word. You can't say that. It's impossible. A third test is the particle can be moved after the object. So she looks up the word becomes she looks the word up. That is possible. Yes. Prepositional verbs. First, they can be separated by an adverb, unlike phrasal verbs, of course. So you can say John looked carefully after the children. That is possible. The particle can't be moved after the object. So you can't say John looks the children after. That is impossible. Third, the cleft movement is possible. What is the cleft movement? Consider the example underneath again. So John looked after the children becomes it is after the children that John looked. That is possible, unlike phrasal verbs. You can't say it is up the word she looks. That is impossible and redundant. Another I forgot to mention that there is another criteria which is called phrasal prepositional verbs. It is a combination between phrasal verbs and prepositional verbs. We're gonna see that. So as an example, I caught up with the leaders on the last lap. So caught up with is a phrasal prepositional verb. Yes, another thing I would like to mention, let's see an example. The director enlarged on the plans for a new office block. So enlarged on is a prepositional verb, and the plans for a new office block is called the complement of the verb. Another thing that has to be mentioned is there are some verbs that look like a compound verb, but they are neither phrasal nor prepositional. A small test is applied to determine their class, transforming the sentence to an interrogative one. Example: John ran up the hill. Where did John run? We do not say where did John run up. That's a signal that this is not a compound verb. Move on now to the lexical verbs. This is the most important criteria in the main verbs. So the lexical verbs are divided into three categories: intransitive verbs, middle verbs, and transitive verbs. Intransitive verbs requires no object and can never be passivized. So consider the example. That is an intransitive verb because it doesn't require an object and it can never be passivized. Middle verbs are a combination between intransitive and transitive verb. They requires an object, but they can never be passivized. So you can say she has a car. So she has a car. Has is a middle verb because it requires an object, car, and it can be passivized. There is no passive form for this verb. Transitive verbs, they are divided into three categories: monotransitive verbs, ditransitive verbs, complex transitive verbs. Monotransitive verbs require a direct object. As an example, the car hits the tree. So hit is a monotransitive verb because there is a direct object, the tree. Ditransitive verbs require a direct object and an indirect object. As an example, she sent me flowers. So sent is a ditransitive verb because there is a direct object, flowers, and an indirect object, me. Complex transitive verbs requires a direct object and an object complement, subject complement, or locative complement. John stood the ladder against the wall. Stood is a complex transitive verb because there is a direct object, the ladder, and a locative complement against the wall. They considered John intelligent. Considered is a CTAV because there is a direct object, John, and an object complement, intelligent. And that's all for the verbs.